Thank you.
Okay, there we go.
So, yeah, maybe just worth, as I said briefly before, just saying that this is, we're talking to quite a broad audience here. So this conversation is going to be we're going to create it into something. But yeah, it's for a very broad audience, and some of that audience won't have much understanding about regenerative cultures. So we want to make it not simplify it, but make it translatable for them. So just to kind of frame that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question, and kind of my curiosity as much as anybody else's, is I'm curious about your story and how you started working with the concept of regenerative cultures and why. How did that happen?
Well, thank you. It's a good place to start, because for me, a lot of what regenerative practice is all about is personal development. Like, it starts in everybody's individual story and how they find their calling and their essence, and then try to express it in the world. So when I do interviews with people who I consider elders in the regenerative movement, I often ask them to start with the personal story. So thank you. I've said this before. Like, basically, I started, like, I'm a German originally, and I wanted to be a marine biologist to study whales and dolphins, and ended up at Edinburgh University studying biology, and then went to California in my undergraduate to do some research on dolphins and also on elephant seals. And I had this moment at one point where I asked myself, with everything that's going on in the world, these animals that I so love and that I want to dedicate my life to, I'm most likely not going to be here when my grandchildren grow up because of our actions. And then I thought of, because I always had this, like, am I going to go into primatology or cetology, so apes or dolphins? And two of my great heroes were Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey, and they're very different characters. Jane Goodall is the saintly, non-violent person who just will do her work and has been for many decades carrying an amazing message. And Diane Fossey was more of a fiery activist type that when people started to encroach on the gorillas she was studying, she kind of tried to like play witchcraft and scare them, and they got scared and they fought back and they killed her. And so I asked myself, what would I do if something happened to these animals? Would I have the capacity to be like Jane Goodall? And I thought, probably not. At the time, I was too fiery, and I felt I was more of a Diane Fossey type. And somehow at that point, I made a decision that it was much more sensible. Like, the best thing I could do for the dolphins was actually to work on my own species, to look at sustainability. At the time, that's what we were calling it. And that started me on a long journey. I did a master's in holistic science at Schumacher College in 2001. That's where I really clicked on the power of design, like learning from elders like John Todd and David Orr, how design was so much more than I thought it was about. I always thought design was just sort of making things look pretty so more people buy it. But that design is actually just human intention and our worldview and what we think we need and what we truly need, translated into somehow us shaping the world around us to meet those needs. And that we need to really pay attention how we do that, because if we do it the wrong way, we mess things up pretty badly. And so in 2006, because I always wanted to do this big mapping of how all of this fits together so it actually makes sense. And so I wrote this 750-page PhD thesis called Design for Human and Planetary Health, a holistic integral approach to complexity and sustainability. But this was like, this whole academic bit came after I actually spent 2 years traveling around in a van, visiting eco-villages, visiting cats, doing multiple courses at the Center for Alternative Technology in different techniques, doing long-term volunteer programs there, going to Findhorn, going to Lebensgarten in Germany, or to Damenhur in Italy, all the different eco-villages. And then I moved to a region in southern Spain in the Alpujarras, where back in 1999, I wanted to set up an environmental education center and eco-village to, as I was calling it then, live the solutions rather than be part of the problem. And honestly, like I did all the things that so many people, I've seen so many people do it since. It's this initial dream where you just want to bring your best friends together and live ever after, and you completely think you'll never have any problems among each other. And also I still thought it was all about straw bale buildings and compost glues and solar panels. And then I realized, whoa, this is much more complex. There's a human dimension that I have absolutely zero idea about, how to work with a team, how to make decisions in a circle, and also the economic dimensions, just basically how do we finance this project, and how do we make a healing project in a degenerative economy that is structurally twisted and wrong. And so yeah, this journey into Schumacher College and all this academia was really the practical activist hippie wanting to learn more how to do it properly. And of course, then I lost myself a little bit in the heady academia stuff. But in 2006, when my PhD was finished, no funding council would have funded the extremely transdisciplinary research and applied research that I wanted to do. Now that would be different, but the reason that happened kind of pushed me. I'm glad now. Life's always like that. One door closes and another opens. Pushed me to sidestep, and I ended up at Findhorn doing the very first Eco-Village design education course that Gaia Education had just launched. And we did a training of trainers there and realized that was a map that was so similar. Like I actually knew that before, that's why I did the course, because in 2005, when they first introduced the curriculum idea, I thought like, wow, that's what I'm working on in my PhD. And so the reason why I went to Findhorn to do the course was to see how this group of educators out of the kind of eco-village activism movement had brought together practices in the same sort of theoretical framework that I was working on in my PhD. And so when I did that course, I did it more to see how they were teaching it rather than what the content was. And ever since then, I've been working with Gaia Education and putting all the kind of more backed up content with lots of books to read and the stories told of people having done it before that we can learn from. And I've been writing that into Gaia Education's work. So I helped to write the content of their online course, and that's really traveled now all over the world. And yeah, so to keep it short, I spent 10 years after that putting things into action, living at Findhorn for 4 years. Then I've moved here to Mallorca because I'm interested in bioregional scale change. And I'm just on a journey. I really think it's an ongoing apprenticeship and pilgrimage that we're all on to somehow understand how can we best serve. And since my book came out, I've realized that there's a power in social media of just putting the stuff out there to start conversations, and then trust that people pick it up. And because I love questions rather than answers. I think we jump to solutions far too quickly.
Absolutely.
Because the minute you give people a question to ask, then you really want them to involve themselves. You're asking them, is this meaningful to me? What have I to contribute to them? Like, join the conversation. If you give them a principle, they kind of are asked to say, I agree with that principle and I join you. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop there.
That's great. I mean, there's so much there that I resonate with personally, and especially I feel like questions are a doorway into learning, aren't they? Like, if you have a statement, then it's kind of like, it's a bit harder to unpack that statement and kind of learn about it. Whereas if you have a question, you have to arrive at the statement yourself, and that journey is I feel like is the growth, is the development. I'm really interested in that. And also what you say about we all have this dream of starting an eco-village or a beautiful community, and it's so right that the interpersonal human dynamics are just as much part of that as any kind of structural or economic aspect. So it's really great to hear you name that. So in a few sentences, how might you explain what regenerative cultures is to someone who's like never heard about it, who maybe, yeah, I'm not going to give more context, just like someone who's heard about the context, the concept.
Well,
not necessarily an easy question.
Yeah, no. It's a question, of course, that I get asked a lot, and I'm trying to not always give the same answer, bring a different nuance to it.
Sure.
Again, I think it is actually a process of inquiry, like we're just talking about questions. So it's a continuous personal and team or community-based inquiry into how we can bring out the unique essence and opportunity that is our unique gift, that when each person has just, there's nothing like you, there's nothing like me another time in the world, or nobody. We are unique. And how do we create a culture where people can really contribute that uniqueness in ways to the larger whole, their community, their ecosystem, the biosphere, in ways that also bring out the maximum potential of that whole community? So how do we participate well in life? How do we, as Janine Benyus from biomimicry has put it so beautifully, life creates conditions conducive to life. So a regenerative culture is constantly on the quest of understanding, how do I best create conditions conducive to life? How do I serve myself? How do I serve my community? And how do I serve the community of life in everything I do? And so that's why I'm so adamant that this is a process of inquiry that is connected to place, and therefore it will be different in each place and in each culture. It's a plural because it will come out slightly differently, because it's the essence that informs us. It's place sourced. It comes out of, like, even within the UK, it will look different in Devon than in Sussex.
Right.
But of course, that for me, the underlying pattern is this ability to how do we draw from the wisdom of many voices, and how do we, when we see that there are seeming unconcilable opposites of opinion, how do we not other people, put them in a box, stop listening to them, just label them because they just said a trigger word that we are against? Oh, he isn't completely and utterly against all forms of capitalism. He still thinks capitalism could be redesigned. Hence, I'm going to stop talking to this person because he's not got it.
Yeah.
Or he doesn't say it's all going to go to collapse, and therefore he's in denial, and stop talking to him. To really stay in the process and say, what is this person's doing, and why are they thinking this? And to stay in that dialogue, and to see that in what seems like irreconcilable opposites, there's potential for a higher level resolution of that we can only get to if we stay open to the conversation. And for me, that's like understanding that life is a planetary process, and we are at one and the same time emergent properties, just parts of that process that pop out. But we are all, because we are part, everything we do, like this conversation, but every action that you do in the rest of this day affects that larger whole that is also you. And so once we get that responsibility of saying, okay, it's not about whether I change the world or not. Just by being, I am changing the world. So how do I be, not just do, but be in a way that I do so wisely for the future of all life? I mean, that's for me at the core of this inquiry process of regenerative cultures. But of course, there are lots of different facets that we can explore.
Yeah, I really, I've been reading Adrienne Marie Brown's book Emergent Strategy, and the thing that's really sat with me from that is this micro and macro scale, and what I choose to embody on the micro will affect the macro, and this kind of relationship between them. So it's really great to hear you speak about that. And I'm experiencing that actually, and I think I'm seeing a lot of people around me also experiencing that, the kind of like clicking, that inquiry of like, this isn't just about like making the changes out there happen, but it's about how we create those changes, both as individuals and collectives.
Maybe another thing that's really an important reframe, and that's a tricky one to stick with, this paradox, because on the one hand, yes, of course, we have a planetary emergency, and that is a problem. Like climate change is a problem. Cascading ecosystems collapse is a massive problem. Obscene inequality is a massive problem. But truly regenerative practice doesn't start from problem mindsets, but from potential mindsets. Like it's about finding out what can happen when we think differently and therefore begin to bring forth the world differently together. And the thought of, here's a problem, we need to solve it, let's declare war on climate change, that's not going upstream enough to really say it's the mindset of problem, solution, war against, that is part of what got us in the first place. If you follow climate change upstream, then you see, okay, this is cascading ecosystems collapse that has been going on for centuries. This is nothing new. Like even before we started burning fossil fuels, with agriculture and with like, I was just looking into a project in Siberia yesterday that is rewilding a massive area of Siberia by bringing back the herds of ungulates that early humans killed off, and therefore changed the vegetation patterns there, and changed the whole climate. Like the fact that when we started hunting whales before fossil fuels for fuel that was made out of the whale blubber, or the sperm seed from sperm whales, that already affected climate, because the whales are the nutrient pumps in the oceans, and without the whales taking krill at the bottom, like in the deeper areas, and then coming up to the surface to breathe and pooping, they fertilize the upper water, that then enables more of that plankton to grow that they later feed on. But in the process, they're massive carbon cyclers in the oceans.
Wow.
And so we really need to understand these larger processes in which we are part of. But then if we go further upstream, like the economic system that we've got has driven a lot of that kind of behavior of destroying the planet. But really, that's also just a symptom. Like the way we've designed our economic system, the mistaken form of extractive capitalism that we've got right now, and that is structurally dysfunctional. And unless we change it, we're not going to fundamentally get different solutions. But ultimately, it's in our hearts and our minds. Ultimately, it's a story about worldview, values, and the narrative, the answers we give to the question, who am I? Where am I going? Where do I come from? Individually and collectively. And to ask, like my book, I wrote it somewhat triggered by the one question that my mentor David Orr asked me in 2006. He said, Danny, before we find out how to create a human presence on Earth that is sustainable, we need to ask a deeper question. And that is, what is it about being human that makes us worth being sustained? Are we worth it? And if we have an answer to that question from that place, in each place sourced and culture sourced, we can create wonderful expressions of why we are worth it. But we need to then also, to my mind, understand that diversity that we so cherish as biodiversity is also expressed in us as life, in our diversity of opinions. And so how do we build a future together while we still disagree on a lot of things? Because I think we'll always disagree on a lot of things.
Yeah. It's like there's need we needed like a meta approach in order to be able to meet each other in the disagreements and not like dip into this kind of cancelling culture of like, you say that word, so therefore I won't associate myself with you, but actually to stay open even though there might be disagreement. I think that's like a huge, there's work needed there, that, you know, you know, when you say about personal development, like that takes work.
Well,
You know,
but when you do that, you probably experienced it yourself. If you try to build a bridge between two camps that are a bit opposing, what you find very quickly is you get shot at from both sides of the bridge. Because in trying to make them understand a little bit more where they are coming from, you sound like them and get attacked, and even and like vice versa. So that's the sort of being aware that that's going to keep happening, and still sitting in the fire, as Anne Mendel calls it with process-oriented psychology, sitting in that fire of saying, okay, let's meet, and in our disagreement find that higher ground from which we can unleash the potential that is actually in humanity to and this is what I believe we need to do. Ultimately, that's what regenerative cultures everywhere would achieve, to my mind, is to redesign the human impact on Earth within the lifetime of the generations alive today, from being exploitative and extractive and degenerative to being healing and regenerative. We are not the cancer on the Earth. We can be a healing power. If we keep telling the story that humans bad, always bad, we will never unleash the potential that we have in, and we have the responsibility, because we messed with the system so badly that we can't just now walk away and say, it's the same as the adult generation saying, oh, look at the Greta generation, they will solve it, and just whoop, no, we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Great. I think you've just answered. I had a question around how, you know, why is this an important thing for us to incorporate within our activism and more broadly within our work towards a better future, but I think you've sort of named it there. But do you feel like there's something there that you would like to respond to anyway?
Well, for me, if I tell you the truth, for me, the biggest hope of what we need to somehow nurture, like if you mentioned, we'll talk briefly complexity, like complex dynamic systems, and you can explain them really easily. Basically, any system with more than 3 interacting variables is a complex dynamic system. That means every cell in your body, every organ, your body as a whole, your family, your community, ecosystems, the planet, and they're all nested, and they're all, the boundaries we put on them, every thing I just mentioned is nested and part of the larger. And this complexity is fundamentally unpredictable and uncontrollable. That means the idea of designing cultures is a paradox, because on the one hand, you can't design culture because culture emerges out of the relationships and the interactions and the information that flows through the system. And it's about the quality and not the quantity of relationships and information that really affects what emerges. And so if we try to positively affect what's going on in this larger system that we're trying to have a healing influence on, then for me, one of the biggest steps right now is to link those people activated by XR, those people activated by Fridays for the Future, the huge amount of people all over the globe, young people and older people, that have finally got that it's not about spectator anymore. We're all having to step on the stage and play this kind of epic act of humanity is transforming itself last minute to respond to a crisis that could mean the end of humanity and the end of much life on Earth. That's the big epic that will play out this century. And what we need is right now, in my view, you know that there's lots of people in XR who already talk about solutions, but the perception right now is we're just saying, I want you to panic, or there's a problem and there's an emergency. It's focused on the problem. if we could connect that whole movement to the wonderful regenerative cultures that already exist, which is the peer-to-peer movement, which is the We Share movement, which is the eco-village movement, the permaculture movement, the agroforestry movement, but also in the social dimensions, there's so much already. There are cultures, not just, I mean, they sound like courses, like nonviolent communication, but really there's a whole culture of people that are trained in that and know about it. There's a whole culture of sociocracy people and holacracy people. There's a culture of people who work with integral theory. And in each one of them, there are people who are completely ready to step up and share these facets of regenerative cultures emerging in all their diversity. And if we can connect all the people who now want to make a difference to these practical ways of making the difference, of learning these capacities, doing stuff on the ground, asking the question in a sort of transition town plus way, that actually plays Aikido with the sustainable development goals and doesn't say, oh, that's a top-down UN process, don't want anything to do with it. It kind of goes, no, actually, I can use the SDGs to have a conversation with town hall and with businesses in this region because they're committed to it. And then I can use that as the entry point, but begin by having a conversation, begin to see the human relationships and make these people shift a little bit and start a different type of dialogue, which is more about how do we come together to regenerate this place. So and for me, that to a large extent, education is central there. So if we only manage to map out an alternative to going to university, to all those school kids who are on Fridays for Future demonstrations, and say, you can take a 4-year apprenticeship where you go to ecosystems restoration camps and eco-villages, and you do online courses, and you travel, and you learn a few languages, and you build capacity in yourself, in relationship, and you will come out 4 years later with less debt and much more experience and much more employable, or you might not want to be employed. You might co-create something and create a cooperative with the people you met on the way. And that's, yeah. So regenerative culture is, for me, the step beyond we need a rebellion and we need to do something. This is what we need to do.
Right, yeah. That's a really beautiful way of putting it. And part of the team I'm involved with are working on a way to offer that. So it's really timely to hear you say that, because that is something that has felt like potentially missing. It's like, okay, we're recognizing that there's a problem, there's people that are becoming activated and waking up to this, but then how do you guide them and support them into that co-creation of the future we want to see? And I think you've just answered that.
One brief thing, because of the word activated, I got this piece on Medium that speaks to that, and it's also in my book, but it's a story that, like as I said, I worked for a long time, still work with them a little bit, with Gaia Education, who to some extent, because I've been on this for a long time, this mapping and making people aware of what's all out there and how it all fits together in a bigger puzzle. And so in many ways, the Gaia Education online course designed for sustainability is one of those. It takes you through these 4 dimensions: social, ecological, economic, and worldview. And in that opens up boxes where you begin to be aware, oh, there's dragon dreaming, there's sociocracy, there's alternative currencies, there's transition towns, there's the regenerative communities network, or the ecosystems. They're all mapped for people. So then they can go wherever, like deepen wherever they feel attracted to. But the person that I worked with, who's the current CEO of Gaia Education, May East, at one point we were running a training together, and she said to me one morning, I still see this is a while ago, she said, I still see myself as an activist, but for me, activism is about getting up every morning, and after my morning meditation, ask myself the question, what do I want to activate with the power of my intention and the power of my spirit, my breath? Where do I want to give my energy to? And what conversations do I want to activate? Do I want to activate the, yes, let's kill all the 1%, they're the evil ones, instead, or do I want to activate the story of, is there a possibility to transform all of humanity and come from life generating conditions conducive to life? Is there a place beyond othering? Can we engage everyone somehow? It's two different stories to activate. It's the story of, am I separate from everyone and the world is just owing me and fight the world and complain about the situation we're in, or activate the story of interbeing, that everything is an opportunity to engage, and that while we can't choose to a large extent what's happening to us, we can choose the attitude we take towards how we respond what's happening to us, and that changes everything. And so there's this reframing of activism as, what am I activating by the language I use, the thought forms I repeat, the actions I do.
I love that. That's so brilliant. I'm going to be taking that and putting it in my pocket. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, so you mentioned the Fridays for Future movement. There is, through the work of various different movements and Extinction Rebellion, I think there is a lot of fear and uncertainty about the future. There is this kind of like sense of foreboding that's happening, and that fear and uncertainty, there's a lot there for the youth as well. So how would you see the work of regenerative cultures supporting people in a post climate change world? Like, if that happens, if that doom and gloom that is being spoken about arrives, like, what is the role that regenerative cultures plays in that possibility?
I think that's another one of those where we, instead of having really interesting conversations about the dynamics and the potential that lies in, like, the pattern in which, as a biologist, if you look how evolution happens and how novelty emerges, then collapse, breakdown, death has always been part of that life as a planetary process. Like the German poet scientist Goethe said more than 200 years ago, that death is life's ingenious way of creating plenty of life. And to some extent, Joanna Macy put it in this wonderful term of saying, we have a dual role. We're hospice workers to a dying system, and we're midwives of a system that wants to be born.
Yeah.
Hospice workers of the industrial growth society, and midwives of the life-sustaining or regenerative culture future. And so I think the jury is still out of whether we can even reverse global warming by doing the right actions at the right scale, geotherapy, not geoengineering, to draw down vast amounts of carbon into soils, standing forests, functional wetlands and mangroves, and begin to heal the damage that we've done over 5,000 years. And I think that the pathway towards doing that is exactly the same pathway as the pathway when you said, okay, what's the other option? It's too late. We're running into a future where basically over 300, 400 years, we just know it's always going to get worse. And there's a few generations left to live out our species on a system that is in meltdown. If we were to prepare for that future, the wisest way of doing that would also be to come back to place, to region, to refit how we meet our needs to the unique conditions of the bioregions we live in, to re-regionalize production and consumption wherever possible, to diversify our local economies in ways that we basically have the resilience that we can meet most of the core needs in the bioregion, but in ways that are aimed at healing and making the bioregion as resilient as possible. So it is also about reforesting and shifting towards a biomaterials economy, and circular biomaterials economy, shifting away from materials that come out of the ground and need high amounts of energy to be pulled out. All these kind of things, if we prepare on the ground, if we make sure that we build food sovereignty, water sovereignty, educational sovereignty, energy sovereignty of renewables at the regional scale, it still needs massive amount of other changes of consuming less or differently. But I think these two paths are actually converging. So in the sense that the more people we get on the path of healing their region co-creatively, having the conversation of what would a regenerative culture in this place look like? What did this place look like in the past? How, but also combining ancient wisdom with modern technology in a way that finds that potential of a both and rather than an either or. So that for me is like, it's defeatist to say that we're definitely had it. I think there is still a real chance to make a difference. And at the same time, we need to embrace collapse because so much of the collapse we will see around us is the collapse of patterns and processes that are dysfunctional and no longer work. It's the dissolution of rigidity, and it happens the same way in ecosystems. Like a climax ecosystem isn't as creative as a patch in a climate ecosystem that has been disturbed and where the trees have fallen over, a storm has come through. That's where a lot of the buzz happens. And in many ways, we, I mean, it's also being aware that that path of planetary healing will take us at least 3 to 4 decades. Right. And even if we do it mobilized by Fridays for Future and XR and everybody else who's trying to mobilize different layers of societies from different storytelling memes, if we achieve it, that we create a level of human collaboration at a local scale, local and global at the same time, to do this everywhere, it will still mean that over the next 10, 15 years, things are probably going to get worse. We're going to see more storms. We're going to see, so it's because there's a lag in the climate system that even if we do all the right things now, we're still going to see more collapse. And that needs a level of maturity of understanding that this work is intergenerational, long-term work. It's like cathedral building work. We started, maybe the next generation finishes it. If we do it well, the next 3 decades are going to be a tough ride no matter what, because we left it too late. But to say the next 3 decades are just riding it out and it's definitely going to go to shits afterwards, I think is mistaken too. And I think that there's, unfortunately, we were talking about ego trips, and that there's a few people that, because it's sort of, being a prophet of doom immediately gives you shed lots of attention. And I find that's really dangerous. I'm all for deep adaptation, but it's been misunderstood by a lot of people as it's all over and prepare for the massive collapse. And it's a bit more nuanced than that. Some collapses and some there's breakdowns and breakthroughs at the same time.
Oh, that's such a great way of framing it. Like that for me fills me with, like I haven't heard it explained or put like that in a way, because I feel like I'm interacting with a lot of people where that it is doom, it is gloom, but to hear you put it in that way, I feel not a sense of hope, like blind hope, but like there's more here. It's a more long-term story we're playing rather than this short-term, we need these demands met in this amount of time. We also need a longevity towards that work.
Also, let me add another nuance to this, because it is also like about understanding the difference between doing and being. And I mean, this might sound really philosophical, But ultimately, I mean, I'm always reminded, for me, this was, it just speaks to that. You know, the wonderful work Joanna Macy has done in translating Rilke's poems. And there's this beautiful poem that Rilke wrote almost 100 years ago, Dear Darkening Ground, where he was basically speaking about this time. And at the end of that poem, he asks, give me just a little more time, give me just a little more time, so I may love the things until they're real and ripe and worthy of you. And that's a shift in being. That's a shift in understanding that the way that we can hold the uncertainty of whether we're going to make it, the actual fact that we don't have that certainty, is what's cooking us to the point that we're actually transforming as beings. It is a species level rite of passage. By confronting the possibility of extinction at the species level, we're now pushed each individually to take a step of maturation and ask, how do we become mature members in the community of life? How do we serve life rather than let life serve us? And understand that in serving life, we serve ourselves because we are life. And that is a being change that ultimately says it doesn't matter whether we're going to make it or not. It matters how we go out, if we go out, and it matters how we go forward, if we go forward. And that's about coming back to the gift that is just this conversation that we're having here right now. Like, being in relationship is what life is all about. And so the minute we act from that state of being, where we're actually not attached to outcomes, and we love the fact that we get the opportunity to be here and respond to this transformational moment in human history, in the history of life, where ultimately what's also happening at the same time is answering the question, why are we worth it? We begin to realize that we are life's way of experiencing self. I mean, of course, a sequoia tree or a penguin also is life's way of experiencing itself, but the level of human consciousness that can put the love for a forest into a song, all the things that can risk your life, direct, non-violent, direct actions, all the beautiful images of XR where people have found that strength, that courage to step up and act from a power that is beyond their individual. Because again, Joanna Macy said this to me at one point. She said, Daniel, when you do these actions, do them with the authority of 3.8 billion years of life's evolution. When you stand on that stage and you tell people, it's not Daniel Wahl talking and your ego, blah, blah, blah. It's life speaking to life. And if we come from that place, then it's a very different, that's where the regeneration happens, I think.
Wow. Yeah, I'm really feeling the life. Thank you. Wow. So I had a couple of questions that were, I was basically trying to put myself in the shoes of people that a variety of different people. So say like the old person that is not so mobile, or and is just starting to find out about these issues and doesn't have a community around them, or the single mother that's living in a tower block that's like working pretty intensely in order to look after her family. I was trying to put myself in those different shoes and think, like, what would those people ask an expert about regenerative cultures? Like, what would they want to know? So I've got a couple of questions that are specifically from that. So I was imagining it like, if I wanted to help support my local community to become more regenerative, and I'm not sure how to start, or to do that in a way that's respectful for everyone's differences, what would you do in a situation like that? Or what advice would you give?
Well, first I briefly have to respond. Like, I think we're making a mistake by repeating the meme of expert cultures. Like, I don't see myself as as an expert. Well, I spent a lot of time on that apprenticeship, and have learned a lot from amazing people that I can share little snippets of insights that other people have given me and some that I had myself. But really, I think that all of us have, if we, and it's difficult. I mean, this is the for me personally, something really big happened when my daughter was born in the last, like she's now 2.5 years old. I kind of realized only through her how somewhat arrogant I had become in my own privilege with every education that I've had, and all the privilege of having been able to live my life the way I've lived this and do all this. And I was quite judgmental of Joe Blogs. Like sometimes I would sit on a bus and I'd hear people talk about whatever the current binge watching telenovela, whatever was on, like I live in Spain. But since I've become a father, I realize how easy it is to be in the treadmill of this degenerative system that is still active out there. And when you look at, with all the love that you look at your children, the priority that they're fed and in school and that they're well, and between the dynamics of partnership and friends and families around that, life can very quickly swallow you up in a way that to point at people and say, you should be doing more for the saving the planet is a bit arrogant. And so, but at the same time, I do feel that we all, simply by having the conversations, it's the conversation with some other mothers while you're waiting for your kid to come out of school, or to just ask these questions that are about how could we live differently, and what, see all these people in the street with climate change, can we not, what is it that we can do about it? Maybe we should ask the school to do a bit more. We're the parents, they need to respond to us. And to also be aware that that no matter how tight the financial situation is, every time we spend into this economic system, we're driving it, even if we spend positively, if we try to be good consumers and buy the right products and stuff, we're still, because the money system is in itself degenerative, and that's another story. We need to somehow change that as well. But we still have a choice. Like consumer cooperatives are popping up everywhere that make local organic food affordable, and even make it the entry point into that conversation. Like just saying, I want to do more, and saying, okay, but how do I do that? To bring a few other people together and say, how do we pool our resources so we can buy local organic food? Can we find a farmer, or because almost everywhere now there are community supported agriculture systems popping up, and if you don't have the money to pay the whole veg box, you can come on a Sunday with your family and do some farming. So it's basically, because what's coming is going to be a bit of a rocky ride, coming back to community is the most important thing. To find others and engage with them in conversation. And I think that children, food, and health are wonderful entry points to that nested wholeness, to understanding all the other bits. Like when you come into food, you understand how it's linked to your personal health, how it's linked to ecosystems health, where it comes from. And it's so easy to, from just entering with what do we eat at home, to completely rebuild your entire worldview almost when you understand it.
Right, amazing. Yeah, great way to articulate that, and really, yeah, really clear. Thank you. And so then I was also thinking about some of the critiques of XR, and yeah, I was thinking about climate justice, and it it's really important to a lot of people within and outside of the movement. And, you know, there's a critique around XR and its whiteness and its privilege. How might regenerative cultures support us, or support us? I say us as in XR, but I think us more widely, to within climate justice and within that part of the movement towards a more beautiful future.
Yeah, that's a huge one, and again, it's very difficult because you've got an overeducated, overprivileged white guy in the second half of his 40s in front of you. So I'm one of the exact examples of what people might be reacting against of, do we need more middle-aged white guys to tell us what to do? And there's a lot of trauma of all the people within each culture, in each country. We've like the xenophobia is popping up so strongly, and I'm originally from Germany. To see that in Germany there's a rise of fascism and neo-Nazis again, I really thought that wasn't going to happen again. Like we were pretty strongly educated about the atrocities that happened in Germany before and during the Second World War, and to see that evil monster is rearing its head all over the world, and how, of course, we need to stand up to that. And it's so difficult to still stay in that place of not othering, not again out of that making a box and not seeing these people anymore, because that just perpetuates the process. And what I find, like recently I had a conversation with Joel Glansberg, who's one of the real elders in the Regenesis Institute and Regenesis group, who kind of carry the lineage of how to use regenerative practice to change how people think, to change the processes behind. And he pointed out, because we were talking about decolonialization, and we were talking about that even that degrowth, decolonialization is again this polarizing, overswinging the pendulum. It's recolonial. Like our minds have been colonialized, all our minds, the white minds as well. And one thing that he pointed out historically, which is really interesting, is that it's not as simple as just saying all the white guys from Europe were the colonializers and went everywhere and fucked up the planet, and now climate change is happening, and it was mainly those cultures that caused 90% of it, and it's hitting all the cultures that actually had less to do with it. And many of these cultures, and that is a fact in history, that first we exploited, raped, and pillaged in colonialism. Then we exploited, raped, and pillaged in neo-colonialism with neoliberal economics and globalization. And now climate change is hitting the same places really hard. And there's a sort of attitude of, oh, we'll lend you some money to solve the problems. That's crazy. But to be mindful of the fact that, like Joel said this, when all these Americans, like when America was colonialized by European settlers, a vast amount of the people that actually went over there were indentured. That means that some rich guy brought 50 or 60 people over, paying for their passage, and then they needed to serve that person for 7 years in order to pay for that passage. And this was at a time where people lived generally into their early 40s. So it was a big chunk of their life. And what he was trying to point out was that actually most of the white guys, the trauma of being oppressed and being slaves happened in the white culture just as much. They were also slaves, and feudal Europe was basically feudal slavery. Like there was a landlord, and so I think we need to realize that it's not as simple of just because you have a different skin color, you're the oppressed, and if you're white, you're the oppressor. It's to understand that this pattern of oppression and of othering runs through all the cultures, and that we need to address these issues, but by just othering again, it's not going to help resolve it. But again, I'm very aware that I'm probably triggering a lot of people in minority cultures by what I've just said, because if you've been subjected to physical violence and psychological violence for how you look or who you love or what your sexuality is or whatever, it's completely understanding that you carry so much trauma and so much anger that to say, who are you to tell me I can't other this fuckhead who punched my girlfriend just for how she looks or something. I understand that people hold that energy, but I think that for me, regenerative cultures is also about taking a deep dive into this, but really listening from a place of interbeing, from actually feeling the pain of that other person deeply inside. Like there's this beautiful poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, Call Me by My True Names. And you can find it, just Google Call Me by My True Names, Thich Nhat Hanh. That for me is the essence, that if anybody who wants to have that conversation about decolonializing XR and so on, just put that poem in your pocket. And whenever there's an argument and you feel like the energy flows up, let's just ring the mindfulness bell and read the poem to everyone, and you to yourself as well, and it will diffuse that conversation a little bit.
Wise words. Yeah, I mean, it's a really charged subject, and I think it's like there's like a plurality of approaches to it, and I think, yeah, it's great to hear you speak on that and speak about the need to find a way to see the overview, and how do we move past that. So my final question, what would be the burning thing that you want to say to Extinction Rebellion? Like if we were all listening, which we are, what but yeah, what is the burning thing that feels really alive for you, that you'd like to say to XR?
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, seriously, I mean it. I don't distinguish as much between XR and Fridays for Future, although I know that but for me, that movement, that surging up of life, like what Paul Hawken called it a long time ago, a planetary immune response. And for me, something really shifted both in the first XR actions here in Palma and the first Fridays for Future demonstration, to see that finally there were so many of us in the street and speaking up for life as life, really touched me deeply and really made me feel hopeful that that we're really now at this point of deep transformation, that the compost building that has been going on for at least 50 years, like right now a lot of people talk about, oh, the big corporates knew about, like the big oil companies knew about climate change 50 years ago. Of course they did. But for 50 years, like I know people who wrote the briefing paper to the 1972 Conference on the Environment, my second PhD supervisor, John Todd. I remember when I asked him 15 years ago, what was it like back then in 1972? Or when you started the New Alchemy Institute, where the first experiments about windmills and all that actually came from. He said, well, back then there were 50, 60 of us, and we kind of knew each other by name, and now there are millions. Yeah? And the jump that has happened just in 2019, with so many more people being aware of the need for transformative change now. But then I would say thank you, and I would also say the biggest challenge is, how do we see the individual human being who cares in all those different, because it's not just in the grassroots movements that this planetary immune response is coming up. There are actually people in the large corporates who have the same life speaking and moving in them and wanting to make a difference. They're in their mindsets, they're in their frames. Yeah? But there are people in the We Mean Business Alliance, the B team that Richard Branson put together. And yes, of course, it's obscene how inequality and how rich he is and all that. But how do we engage everybody? Like I find it really frustrating, this wrong kind of green movement that just shoots down the conversation about the new Green Deal and all of that, and immediately, like, all the kind of people who are still trapped in the technology will ride over the hill and save us story. There are lots of people who are actually working on pretty useful things for the transition. Like, it's not, none of it is quite so clean cut to actually keep seeing the positive in these impulses and trying to engage them. Because if we're understanding that we're all kind of, from our limited perspectives, all half right and half wrong, trying to do something about it and start walking in the same direction, that higher ground together, it's so much easier to then have the conversation. Mate, you still don't get it, that there's something wrong with the capitalist system as we have it right now. But then to maybe have the skillful means of saying, let's not bedevil everybody who uses the word capital, and reclaim that and reframe that and work with that energy. So basically, it's a long way of saying, please be super mindful of not creating an other. And of course, the world is othering XR, like this whole thing of being radicals, or being even almost declared terrorists and all this kind of stuff. But that's the deep practice. The deeper level of non-violent direct action in a truly Gandhian kind of way is not to get triggered by that. And not to respond with, oh, you're othering me, then I'll give you a bit of othering. But to actually keep open, keep in dialogue, and really shift from, it's all going to shits and we have a extinction as the first word, rebellion, to saying, to avoid extinction, we need rebellion, because that's what you're saying. And if we co-create regenerative cultures everywhere, then we won't have as much extinction as if we don't. We're still committed, unfortunately, to lots of species disappearing, but we're also capable of slowing that down drastically and improving vast areas of land and oceans, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
The thing, it's the getting excited about the positive bit, that we are the generation that is called to transform the human impact on Earth, and the only way to do it is to do it together and not to keep chopping humanity to bits.
So, like, there's so many things that you've said that feel like, for me, are keys, and unlocking new understanding and new possibilities. It's lots for me to go away and think about, and I'm excited to figure out how I write this up and translate what you said onto paper. I really respect you and respect your insight and it does feel like you're like an elder of regenerative cultures. You have a certain amount of wisdom, and that wisdom is about us asking these questions together. But it's really great to be asking them with you. So thank you.
That's really, thank you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really hard to hear positive feedback. We're all kind of used to like the slightest amount of criticism goes in deep and keeps you awake at night, and something as lovely as you just said to me is, oh yeah, and it doesn't go in. So a friend of mine recently said, Daniel, you need to let it in because it nourishes. you. And so I'm trying to practice that right now, and thank you. So that was, thank you. In general, it was a wonderful conversation, and thank you for everything you do, because yeah, we're just two different expressions of the same planetary process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I'll send you a copy before of how I've written everything up before it goes out. And yeah, just thank you. Just really big thank yous. I'm here to support you, and I'll stay in touch of like what we're up to. But yeah, there was a thing that you spoke to that I just wanted to briefly mention before I go, about the vision. Like, what is the vision? Like, that's been a big piece missing from XR, and I'm a part of a team that's working on a campaign to bring that into the movement of like, okay, so you're now asking the questions of like, what can I do that I can start creating this future? How can I start creating the changes that we need? And that's going to be this Regenerate 2020 campaign, a sort of movement of movements of regenerative cultures. So we'll see how it goes, but that's something.
Reach out to Nenad and the people from Ecolis, you know, the Ecolis network, because that is a network of expressions of regenerative culture across Europe that are quite grassroots based, and they would love to be of help. Like, they basically, we've already, like, there's a wonderful sentence that E.F. Schumacher, the guy who Schumacher College is named after, he said, we may not be able to raise the winds, but we can set the sails, so when the wind comes, we're ready. And there's a hell of a lot of people out there, the Center for Alternative Technology and all the eco-villages and all the permaculture movement, that get in touch with Maddie Harland at Permaculture Network, or Andy Goldring. They're all like, I mean, this is UK focused at the moment, these but they're all already, they are regenerative cultures, and bringing the kind of people who've jumped onto XR but aren't aware of this, just making that system visible to each other is the big transformative change that we need right now. We need to see that we've actually been working on the solution and the response for 50 years, but below the radar. And XR and FF have put us above the radar, and now we need to bring that back. So it's
bridge building. Absolutely.
Great.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. I'll hit stop now. Just very briefly, is it okay if I share this also with on social media and do a little write-up about it, or would you like to do it first through XR?
Yeah, I don't know. Let me ask my team. I think what would be ideal is if we can do a write-up first, and then I think, just because.
Yeah, no, but being nice on my way as well. Okay. But let me know what your team thinks.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hit stop.
And also, I was going to say, because I know that you're involved with the Schumacher